So in this lecture, we will discuss a method to reduce the dataset for future analysis. So in particular, I'm going to look at data reduction. So in real data, so you may have a huge data set. And if you use the original complete data set for the analysis could take a very long time. So a simple way to do that is to do sampling. So basically going to obtain a reduced data set. And this reduced data is a good representation of the original data, but it's much smaller in the volume, and it can produce similar results for the analysis. And in SAS Enterprise Miner, we have a tool called sampling node. So we're going to use the sampling node. So in sampling node, typically there are two options. The first one is called simple random sample, or SRS. This simple random sample, as the name says, you just randomly select data from your original data and to get a reduced data. So that's randomly. So and each original data has the same probability to be selected. And the second option is called stratified sampling. So the stratified sampling is useful in, for example, in the classification case, if you have two classes, like a fraud detection example, if you have fraud class and non-fraud class, and typically the fraud class is a very rare class. You may have less than, like say, 1% of the samples has fraud. Then in this case, to do stratified sampling, we sample based on their class. Okay, so data are stratified on target, fraud and non-fraud. And then within each class, we sample with some percentage. Okay, so that's two commonly used sampling method. So we're going to illustrate how to do that in SAS Enterprise Miner. So again, we're going to use the HMEQ data for our analysis. So to do that, you just add a node called sample node. So that's in the sample tool. You have the sample node. And let's connect the original data of the sample node. So in practice, you can also connect the sample node to the one after you transform a variable. Okay, and in the sample node, you can specify the method of the sampling method. Okay, you can specify default one, or you can specify simple random sample and stratified sample, and there are also other options, sampling methods. If you want to know more about detail of the sampling method, you can click the help menu. Okay. And then from here, you can see a detailed discussion of each node. For example, for sample node, that's this one. And then here's the instruction of the meaning in the property manual. For example, sample method, default method is either SRS or a stratified. If the targeted variable is a class variable, that's a stratified, otherwise that's SRS. There are a million of different options. All right, so let's use the stratified, that's the default one, because our data, the target is a binary variable. Okay, and then I'm going to run the sampling methods. By the way, you can specify the percentage you want to sample. You could specify 10%. Okay. So based on your data set, if the data is very, very huge, and you may specify a small percentage for the reduced data. All right, so I finished. And if we click results, then you can see a difference between the original data. You remember in the original data, we have roughly 6,000. So in 6,000 observations. And within this 6,000 observations, we have roughly 80% of bad equals 0 and 20% of bad equals 1, right? And because in our sample, we use a stratified sample with a percentage of 10%. then that's to say within each target beta equals 0, we sample 10% from this original 4771. So that's why I gave 477 samples with beta equals 0, and about 119 with beta equals 1. So this stratified sample ensure the percentage, the relative percentage of beta equals 0 and beta equals 1 is consistent with the original data now. Okay, and then afterwards we can do the remaining analysis using the sample data set. All right, so that's the end of the discussion of sample node. If you want to learn more about the options here, you can take a look of the help menu.